Hello, my dear children. Myself Sujata. Hope you have revised the previous portion. In the last class, we learned about the February Revolution in Petrograd, formation of the Petrograd Soviet, post February Revolution, and what changed after October Revolution. In this session, we learn about the Civil War, making a socialist society, Stalinism and Collectivization, global influence of the Russian Revolution. Let us begin with the Civil War. Actually, the Civil War was between the Bolsheviks and the non Bolsheviks. When the Bolsheviks ordered land redistribution, the Russian army began to break up. Soldiers, mostly peasants, they wished to go home for the redistribution and deserted. Deserted means to illegally leave the armed force. Non Bolshevik socialists, liberals, and supporters of autocracy condemned the Bolshevik uprising. Their leaders moved to South Russia and organized troops to fight the Bolsheviks, also known as the Reds. During 1918 and 1919, the Greens, the socialist revolutionaries, and Whites, pro Tsarists, controlled most of the Russian Empire. They were backed by French, American, British, and Japanese troops. All those forces who were worried at the growth of socialism in Russia. As these troops and the Bolsheviks fought a civil war, looting, banditry, banditry means the use of violence, and famine became common. Supporters of private property among whites took harsh steps with peasants who had seized land. Such actions led to the loss of popular support for the non Bolsheviks. By January 1920, the Bolsheviks controlled most of the former Russian Empire. They succeeded due to cooperation with non Russian nationalities and Muslim Jadidis. Cooperation did not work where Russian colonists themselves turned Bolshevik. In Khiva, in Central Asia, Bolshevik colonists brutally massacred. Massacred means to kill brutally local nationalists in the name of defending socialism. In this situation, many were confused about what the Bolshevik government represented. Partly to remedy this, most non Russian nationalities were given political autonomy. Autonomy means the right to govern themselves. In the Soviet Union, there is a USSR, the state the Bolsheviks created from the Russian Empire in December 1922. But since this was combined with unpopular policies that the Bolsheviks forced the local government to follow, like the harsh discouragement of nomadism. Nomadism means the lifestyle of those who do not live in one place but move from area to area to earn their living. So, attempts to win over different nationalities were only partly successful. Okay, now let us see when the Bolsheviks came into power, what were the changes that occurred. During the Civil War, the Bolsheviks kept industries and banks nationalized. They permitted peasants to cultivate the land that had been socialized. Bolshevik used confiscated land, that is, the land which was seized, to demonstrate what collective work could be. A process of centralized planning was introduced. Officials assessed how the economy could work and set targets for a 5-year period. On this basis, they made the 5-year plans. The government fixed all prices to promote industrial growth during the first two plans. That was between 1927 to 1932 and 1933 to 1938. Centralized planning led to economic growth. Industrial production increased between 1929 and 1933 by 100% in the case of oil, coal, and steel. New factory cities came into being. However, rapid construction led to poor working conditions. In the city of Magidagorsk, the construction of a steel plant was achieved in 3 years. Workers lived hard lives, and the result was 550 stoppages of work in the first year alone. In living quarters, in the winter time, at 40 degrees below, people had to climb down from the fourth floor and dash across the street in order to go to the toilet. An extended schooling system developed, and arrangements were made for factory workers and peasants to enter universities. Crutches were established in factories for the children of women workers. Cheap public health care was provided. Model living quarters were set up for workers. The effect of all this was uneven, though, since government resources were limited. Okay, now let us try to know about Stalinism and collectivization, or Stalin's collectivization program. The period of the early planned economy was linked to the disasters of the collectivization of agriculture. By 1927 to 1928, the towns in Soviet Russia were facing an acute problem of grain supplies. The government fixed prices at which grain must be sold, but the peasants refused to sell their grain to government buyers at these prices. Stalin, who headed the party after the death of Lenin, introduced firm emergency measures. He believed that rich peasants and traders in the countryside were holding stocks in the hope of higher prices. Speculation had to be stopped and supplies confiscated. In 1928, party members toured the grain producing areas, supervising enforced grain collections and raiding kulaks, the name for well to do peasants. So, well to do peasants were called kulaks. As shortages continued, the decision was taken to collectivize farms. It was argued that grain shortages were partly due to the small size of holdings. After 1917, land had been given over to peasants. These small sized peasant farms could not be modernized. To develop modern farms and run them along industrial lines with machinery, it was necessary to eliminate kulaks and take away land from peasants and establish state controlled large farms. What followed was Stalin's collectivization program. From 1929, the party forced all peasants to cultivate in collective farms. The bulk of land and implements were transferred to the ownership of collective farms. Peasants worked on the land and the kolkhoz profit was shared. Enraged peasants resisted the authorities and destroyed their livestock. Between 1929 and 1931, the number of cattle fell by one third. Those who resisted collectivization were severely punished. Many were deported and exiled. Deported means forcibly removed from one's own country. Exiled, forced to live away from one's own country. So many were deported and exiled as they resisted collectivization. Peasants argued that they were not rich and they were not against socialism. They merely did not want to work in collective farms for a variety of reasons. Stalin's government allowed some independent cultivation but treated such cultivators unsympathetically. In spite of collectivization, production did not increase immediately. In fact, the bad harvests of 1930 and 1933 led to one of the most devastating famines in Soviet history when over 4 million died. Many within the party criticized the confusion in industrial production under the planned economy and the consequences of collectivization. Stalin and his sympathizers charged these critics with conspiracy against socialism. Accusations were made throughout the country, and by 1939, over 2 million were in prisons or labor camps. Most were innocent of the crimes, but no one spoke for them. A large number were forced to make false confessions under torture and were executed. Several among them were talented professionals. Okay, now let us move on to the topic the global influence of the Russian Revolution and the USSR. Existing socialist parties in Europe did not wholly approve of the way the Bolsheviks took power and kept it. However, the possibility of a worker state fired people's imagination across the world. Many countries, communist parties were formed like the Communist Party of Great Britain. The Bolsheviks encouraged and colonial peoples to follow their experiment. Many non Russians from outside the USSR participated in the Conference of the Peoples of the East, and the Bolshevik founded Comintern, an international union of pro Bolshevik socialist parties. Some received education in the USSR Communist University of the Workers of the East. By the time of the outbreak of the Second World War, the USSR had given socialism a global face and world stature. Yet, by the 1950s, it was acknowledged within the country that the style of government in the USSR was not in keeping with the ideals of the Russian Revolution. In the world socialist movement too, it was recognized that all was not well in the Soviet Union. A backward country had become a great power. Its industries and agriculture had developed, and the poor were being fed. But it had denied the essential freedoms to its citizens and carried out its developmental projects through repressive policies. By the end of the 20th century, the international reputation of the USSR as a socialist country had declined, though it was recognized that socialist ideals still enjoyed respect among its people. But in each country, the ideas of socialism were rethought in a variety of different ways. Okay, now let us look into this timeline of the Russian Revolution. Remembering dates and events, it is very important. Starting from the year 1900, Tsar Nicholas II rules over the Russian Empire with absolute power. In the year 1904, Russia suffered humiliating defeats in a war against Japan, which led to protest and calls for reform. In the year 1905, after Bloody Sunday, Nicholas II agreed to allow a Duma or the legislature for the people. 1914, Russia entered First World War and quickly suffered heavy losses in major defeats to Germany along the Eastern Front. March 1917, revolts in Petrograd forced the Tsar to abdicate and a provisional republic was established. November 1917, Lenin and the Bolsheviks take control in Petrograd and overthrow the Republic. The year between 1918 to 1921, Bolsheviks, called as the Reds, fight and win a civil war against the White Army. 1922, Lenin established the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic under the control of the Communist Party. In the year 1929, Stalin became the sole ruler of the USSR and created a totalitarian state. Okay, hope you have understood. Now try to read the textbook thoroughly and do this activity. Why did people in Central Asia respond to the Russian Revolution in different ways? Compare the passages written by Shaukat Usmani and Rabindranath Tagore. Read them in relation to sources C, D, and E given in your textbook, page number 46-47. What did Indians find impressive about the USSR and what did the writers fail to notice? And also answer all the questions given at the end of the chapter. See you in the next session. Thank you.